Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood, and joining me, as always, is Ultiworld senior editor Keith Raynor. Keith, hello. You got the holiday spirit vibe in your house at this point?
A little bit. We actually just had my wife decided that she wants to put up some Christmas decorations, which we haven't necessarily done. I don't think we've ever gotten a tree. We did like an art tree one year. We had like a tree drawing that we like drew ornaments on. That was fun. But she wanted to get Christmas lights, and they just arrived yesterday. So we're going to be putting some lights out in the front of the house.
Well, it's normally a time for us to be kind of thinking about wrapping up the end of the year and talking about, what's the best throw we saw and, talking about what's coming up in 2022. But right now we got so much happening here in 2021. The college championships are coming up in just over a week, and we've got the Western Ultimately Winter Cup coming up this weekend. So it's actually still really busy with Ultimate. So we're going to dive into all of this today. College pools are now out. We have the schedule. We're going to talk about it later in the show. So stay with us for that. First up, a little quick news out of the AUDL. They are expanding into 3 new cities in 2022. They are opening franchises in Denver, Salt Lake City, a reprise, and Portland, Oregon. And there was some news that came out over the last week or so, particularly out of the Colorado area, where the local team clearly put in a lot of time with press releases and got a bunch of press in both the newspaper and on television about their new team. It's the Colorado Summit. And we also have the Salt Lake Shred, a reference to skiing and snowboarding. I put skiing first because I'm a skier. And we still don't have a name for the Portland team or really all that much information at this point. So this expands the league back again. They're going to return to 4 divisions after having sort of the mega Atlantic in 2021. So Dallas and Austin, which were in the West, are going back to the South, and they will join Tampa, Raleigh, and Atlanta in the South. Pittsburgh moves back to the Central, playing against the typical teams from out there: Chicago, Minnesota, Madison, Indy, Detroit. The Canadian teams rejoin the East and will play against the Northeast teams: Boston, New York, Philly, and DC. And then you have the West, which is the 3 new teams, plus Seattle, LA, San Diego, and San Jose. 3 teams from each division will make the playoffs. And there will be a 2-3 game, and then the 1 seed gets a bye into the divisional final. The winners of the divisional final will move on to the championship weekend. So a couple of bigger divisions, and then some 5-team divisions. So that's an interesting note. Or I think, was it 1-5, 1-6, and 2 7s?
I think so, yeah.
So interesting that they're going to leave just 5 teams in the South, and very good ones at that. Keith, your reaction to these moves from the AUDL?
For me, it harkens back to the old Wild West days of the AUDL. For some reason in my head, like, my first instinct is like, oh, I wonder who bought this franchise on Craigslist for $1,500 or whatnot. But I know it's a little more, it's a little more formal than it used to be. The yet to win Salt Lake Lions still have never defeated anybody. And they'll live with that legacy, presumably, and unless this new Shred team decides to take out the Lions. That would be kind of sweet if they do they need throwback Lions gear? You and I have been talking about this. This is like one of the first franchises that could really have throwback gear to like a previous iteration.
Absolutely should happen. 100% should happen.
I mean, there's some reasons to think the league could have been contracting, right? There are teams that I think every offseason people are like, well, there's not a 0% chance that the team's not here next year. Instead, they're growing. And over the past 2 off seasons, they've managed to move into probably the 3 biggest markets that they had on their bucket list: Boston, Portland, Denver. Like, those are the 3 spots that they wanted to hit, and now they've managed to get into all 3. And we'll see what the foothold looks like there in a longer term. But that seems like an altogether good, healthy sign for the league. I mean, there are still people who are interested in investing their money in this venture, despite years of probably losses for all the existing owners. So somebody still believes the dream. I mean, there's enough there to convince people who have had fiscal success, likely in some way, to put their money into this league and into the sport.
Well, it's been really interesting. I mean, Denver's been the hole in the map for some time. Certainly you could say about Portland as well, but there were like, at least there was going to be a Portland team, and then the ownership fell through. But like Denver was never really discussed in the past, and I think similar to Salt Lake City, it was kind of looked at as it was just too difficult to be a team there because you have to fly everywhere, and everybody has to fly to you. But I guess they're willing to deal with that and not really have driving distance games. I suppose you could drive from Denver to Salt Lake, but I don't know why you would.
That was something that jumped out to me. I mean, that was cited as a reason rather than the abysmal performance that Salt Lake was canned, was the costs were just too high. I don't know that those costs have changed at all. So the economics on the other end must have changed. I mean, there must be more money available because certainly these two teams are going to have travel issues. Now, Seattle, I'm sure, is very glad, and all the West teams are glad that they can be a little more efficient with that Portland-Seattle swing in the same way you kind of go through the Texas teams. But it's a bit strange. And then the whole uneven divisions, but even playoff bids thing, that feels a little weird to me. I know our AUDL reporter and host of our fellow podcast, All Seven, our AUDL podcast, which has also talked about this. They had an interview with Bryce Merrill of the Salt Lake Shred as well. So you can definitely check that out. But he raised a bunch of concerns about the oddity of having such inequitable distribution of access to the playoffs. Being in a 5-team Central is so much better. You're in such a more likely position to make the playoffs than a 7-team East, which is probably going to be like a gauntlet week in and week out.
Yeah. And so wait a minute. It's 6 teams in the Central, Keith, just to clarify.
Sorry, 6 teams,
it's
6 teams Central, 5 teams
South.
Yes.
And those teams in the South are good. Like, it's not going to be easy buckets, right? You've got Raleigh, Atlanta, Austin, Dallas, and Tampa. And really, of those teams, only Tampa feels like an automatic not going to make the playoffs team. So you've got 4 teams for 3 spots. And, presumably the team that doesn't go will still be a pretty good team. Austin really trending in the right direction. Signing Kyle Henke, Dallas maybe starting to look a little shaky in terms of its future prospects after this season. But it's true. Like, you've got 60% of the teams in the South making the playoffs. And, in the 7-team divisions, it's only 43%. So that's quite a difference. I get it, right? There's geographical considerations here. I think the easy thing to do, to be honest, would be to put probably Denver in the South, which...
Oh, I would push DC South.
I mean, that's the other option. And I think that probably makes more sense from just like a travel logistics perspective. But either way, I mean, the problem is, do you want to split up DC Philly and DC New York? Like, it's a lot closer to go there than it is for DC to go to. I mean, those are literally driving distances. I'm sure if DC had its way, they were demanding to stay in the East. And wouldn't want to go to the South.
I'm sure of it. I imagine that the league was probably pushing to try and find a way to make things even, but ownership was like, no, we don't want to have to bear the burden here. We'll just take it's that is where we're at right now. Is teams need to save the money more than they need to get the playoff spots.
Right. I mean, I think the way to make this at least somewhat better is to have teams playing cross-divisional games against power matched opponents, kind of like what the NFL does. And I think that can at least create some balance by giving opportunities to teams from, bigger divisions to maybe play weaker teams in the smaller divisions. But either way, with a number of teams that's not divisible by 4, you're going to have imbalance somewhere. And so I think you just got to, I guess, eventually try to add more teams and get to that parity. Overall, though, I think these additions make sense from the overall structure of the league. And I think one of the big things, it seems like, at least so far, there's fairly clear buy-in from the communities. Like at the press conference in Denver, you had like notable coaches and figures there and involved, and clearly like people are like, yes, we want to have this AUDL team. Now, also there was an article where Claire Chastain and Megan Ives of Molly Brown were extremely critical, as they have been, of the AUDL coming into Colorado. But from like the men's side, at least, it looks like there's some buy-in there. Same thing in Salt Lake. You have leadership that includes the most sort of influential coaches in the state. That is going to create the kind of, good start that the Salt Lake Lions, for example, never had. And you look around the league, it's very obvious to see where there's buy-in and where there's not. And the teams without buy-in are generally struggling. They're either just really bad because they don't get the good players from the area, or people don't go to the games, or both. So, for the AUDL to have a chance to make it, there has to, public relations with the local communities has to be a huge priority moving forward. And this seems like, at least from what we've seen from these new franchises, it's like a good start.
It's a mixed bag, I would say, in Denver. I mean, to have some of the highest profile, in fact, the highest profile players in your area criticizing the addition of the league and of the team, that's going to ruffle some feathers. I mean, that's got to put some doubts in the heads of potential players and fans. I mean, there is no question that the visibility of Molly Brown has exceeded Bravo's, and certainly success lately, the star power in that Molly Brown team, that there's influence there. And, I imagine that there will be some continued friction between those segments within that community. And that could be a real challenge. I mean, we've seen other communities have fractious relationships that have some of the AUDL teams at the center. And so that could be a problem for them. I'm also a little concerned that the Portland team seems a little bit behind the eight ball. I don't know what's up with that, given that we've known that for a long time they wanted to get to Portland. Why they felt like they needed to make the announcement now if they didn't have Portland's ducks in a row here. But I guess ducks is an Oregon thing, not a Portland thing necessarily. But it's a little strange to me, and it'll probably all get ironed out in the wash. But it's not exactly what you want to see when you're making a big announcement about expansion.
We've got these three new teams, and two of them have names, and one of them doesn't. Ultimate Frisbee. Anyway, the league marches on, and we talked this year about how good the on-field play was. I mean, really competitive product in 2021 for the AUDL, and we'll see what this does to the league. I mean, the way that Portland's been playing in club, you feel like that's a great addition. Denver, will have that high altitude home field advantage, which will certainly make things interesting there. I love seeing Dallas and Austin going back to the South Division. I think that the Dallas Raleigh rivalry, which it may not be what it once was, depending on what Dallas's roster ends up looking like. But, maybe it becomes Austin Raleigh, and that could be fun. And I think that was something that we missed in what felt like a lot of focus in 2021 was on the Atlantic Division. It was just, there were more teams, there were more compelling matchups for the most part. And so now this kind of balances back out. We get the Canadian teams back, which, that's going to shake up things in the East. Should be an interesting 2022.
I have more thoughts to share, Charlie, but I think you and I are going to save those for the subscriber bonus segment, where we're going to talk big picture about the semi-pro ultimate landscape and where we're at going into 2022.
Yep. So join us there, ultiworld.com/subscribe. Let's turn our attention to the Western Ultimate League. The Winter Cup is coming up this weekend. 6 teams will be heading to San Diego to compete in sort of an interesting, it's not exactly a tournament, and it's not exactly a round robin. Every team's going to play 2 games, and there's various ways to score points and but you can, winning games helps, doing well statistically helps. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. The rosters are now out for these 6 teams: Arizona Sidewinders, Los Angeles Astra, San Diego Superbloom, San Francisco Falcons, Seattle Tempest, and Utah Wild. And so they will be heading down. This is kind of the first, really, this is the first Western Ultimate League event. They had the little scrimmage up in Seattle between the Seattle team and then kind of the all-star team from the rest of the league. And it was a cool game, but, it didn't really feel like an official Western Ultimate League event. This is. All the games are going to be streamed. You can catch those on the Western Ultimate League YouTube and Twitch channels. And then, we get a chance to see, semi-pro women's ultimate on the West Coast, which, we haven't really. There's been little pockets here and there. The Seattle team over the last couple of years, they've had some games. Southern California's had some teams and they've played some games. And now we kind of get the full thing here with the 6 teams. What are you looking forward to about this, Keith?
Well, we've been waiting a long time to get a chance to see what the Western Ultimate League's version of the game is going to look like. Who are going to be the stars that emerge? That's obviously one of the things that I want to see. There's names that we recognize on these rosters, but I have seen this enough times to know that there are people who I'm not familiar with or whose game I don't know that well that will make a big impact in these games. And finding out those new players is always a lot of fun. And getting to get hyped about players you weren't familiar with previously is one of the exciting things that is a product of these types of pro games. Think of all the players you've learned about in the AUDL and PUL that you hadn't heard from college or club or whatnot. Getting a chance to kind of get a sense of the flavor of this Western Ultimate League. How does it differ from the Premier Ultimate League? How similar is it? How similar is it to the club scene? Does it have its own vibe that feels compelling? And it's not clear to me now. I think originally when the Western Ultimate League formed, there's kind of a thought like, oh, this is a pretest to see if there's a potential long-term merger between the WUL and PUL. I've not heard much talk about that since, and in large part because I think the Western Ultimate League hasn't been playing yet. But so it's understandable why that hasn't been a big topic of conversation, but it's unclear if that's even really something on the table. Again, something we could talk about more in the subscriber segment, but that's kind of something I'm going to be looking at is, does it seem like there's a lot of compatibility between the 2 women's leagues that we have?
So let's talk about the format for this Winter Cup. So again, like I said, each team going to play 2 games during the weekend. You score 15 points if you win your game. And then you can score 4 points for finishing in first place in a statistical category and 2 points for finishing in second place in a statistical category. Those categories are goal differential, longest pulls by average air time, individual goals leader, individual assist leader, and individual blocks leader. So if your team has the highest goal scorer on the weekend, then you get 4 points, or each day, excuse me. So then you also score points for fan engagement. The fan fantasy game winner's home team will score 10 points. And the Instagram contest winner will score 8 points. So you can check out the Western Ultimate League social media to check out how that's all going to go down. There are also some tiebreakers, which goes head-to-head, goal differential, and then total goals scored. So we're going to have kind of a moving target in terms of who's ahead. Obviously, if you go 2-0, right, that's 30 points straight out. That's going to put you in a pretty good position. You're probably going to have to go 2-0 in order to have a chance to win the weekend. But then, you got to do well in these other categories as well. I think it's interesting having pulling airtime as one of the categories. I feel like teams are going to focus on that more than they maybe normally would, which it'll be interesting to see if that has any noticeable impact on the game.
I actually was just thinking about that. That's a really odd inclusion to me, and I expect teams will not be thinking very much about it, aside from maybe we really need to not pull out of bounds, which I assume will go as a 0. in that case. Like, just don't pull out of bounds. Most teams are probably thinking, once they get out there on the field, the players are going to go back into the modes that they've always played in, especially since they haven't had a lot of previous reps doing this. I mean, we saw this when we were watching the Premier Ultimate League play in their championship series. It seemed like players that sometimes kind of forgot that they were in a different format, that there were slightly different rules. Coaches had the same problem. I mean, it's really easy to fall back into your old habits, especially with the club season having just wrapped up. So I actually think we'll probably see pulls look pretty much like they always would, and maybe the occasional time. Maybe you think a little bit.
A roller?
Yeah, I think we'll probably see way less rollers, that kind of stuff. But I don't think they're not that frequent anyway. I mean, they're probably more frequent in semi-pro play than in actual play, I think, in a lot of ways. I'd certainly hope the conditions are not windy enough that rollers feel like the optimal option.
Right.
But this is a very curious, decision to say, like, hey, let's have fan engagement impact the outcome. To me, that is a big step, because it's not something that we see very frequently. And I'm curious to see how people will respond to it. I mean, this is a great opportunity for the league to do this, because it's not necessarily like you're not winning the league championship per se. This is kind of a special event, a showcase event. So I think it's a really cool idea to have fan engagement be an actual component in being the most successful team. I'm very interested to see what the response looks like.
Yeah, I mean, with a spectator-focused 6-team event like this, there's not really a great way to, crown a champion based on normal rules of competition with semis and finals and whatnot. Like, sure, you could seed the teams and play a straight bracket with like 4 teams playing in pre-semis and then 2 semifinals and a final. And that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. But that's kind of weird, and like, it doesn't allow you to set up for fan engagement, because, they're going to put the LA and San Diego games in the primetime slots in the evening in order to get, the most fan attendance. So with that in mind, how else do you do it? If you're going to give every team 2 games, you can't do any kind of normal approach to crowning a champion. So, getting creative makes a lot more sense than trying to shoehorn some weird like USAU algorithm thing or something. So yeah, well, we'll see how it works out. I'm mostly, it doesn't matter that there's not like a champion. I think it's more about having good games and getting a chance to have all the teams there to, kick off what is essentially your league, and have the chance to get some games on film and have a chance to get photographs and all of these things that, in theory, you're going to use in 2022 when you have an actual season. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, let's take a look at the rosters, huh? We have rosters for every team. And so let's just start with the first in my list, which is Seattle Tempest. This is the team kind of that has the most history, really, in, there's formerly the Cascades. They split into 2 names, although they keep a lot of the branding with the blue and the green. It kind of gives me, I can't stand it, because I just cannot stand the Seahawks, and it looks like Seahawks colors. But let's take a look at this team. Who stands out here for you, Keith?
Well, of course, it's hard to look at this roster and not notice immediately the presence of Chyna Titcomb, who has been, really established herself as one of the key presences in Seattle Ultimate. Now she's played with Mixtape previously of Riot, and obviously is very involved on the business side of organizing Ultimate in the area. So she's someone that really stood out. And then a lot of the names that you might remember from Riot: Sheer Stern, Steph Lim, Charlie Mercer, formerly of Riot as well. And then
Cheryl Sue, breakout player of the year in the mixed division.
Absolutely. And another exciting one, Amy Kwai had a nice season with Riot. Lexi Garrity has been a core piece of Mixtape for a number of years. So there's a lot of experience here. And I do think that to some degree, the time that the Tempest has gotten to play that other teams haven't is going to give them a slight advantage. Like, they will be slightly more than just the sum of the talent on the roster in the way that I think a lot of the other teams might be.
Let's take a look at the Utah Wild. Just 17 players on the Wild roster for the weekend. Um, and not going to have the same kind of well-known names because many of the players coming from Utah, not right now a state that is sending teams in the women's division or the mixed division to club nationals. But there's some very good players on this team, no doubt. Megan Maxfield, Paige Kircher. What I think's a lot of fun about this whole thing is that, like you said earlier, Keith, we get to see players who may not be household names show up and really compete with the best. And we're guaranteed to see some surprises this weekend that from players that we've never heard of before.
Absolutely. And someone like Corey Bigham or Melinda Alvey could be big contributors here. But I'm with you. I'm really looking forward to the Megan Maxfield show. We got to know a little bit about her during the club season. She is explosive and a lot of fun to watch. I can't say that she's going to go out there and have an MVP campaign or anything like that, but I expect her to end up on the highlight reel with some big bids because she can take off.
San Francisco Falcons. I mean, obviously, team coming from San Francisco, you're probably going to put them as the favorite just without even looking at the roster. And I think when you look at the roster, there's reason to consider this team the favorite. Lots of strong talent from the area. Marissa Mead, Natasha Wan, Lexi Zalk, Sam Applegate, Shayla Harris, Han Chen, ton of talent, ton of players who've proven it at the highest levels in college and club. And, I think for me, my money probably on the Falcons to be the standout team this weekend.
Absolutely. They would be to me the heavy favorites in the betting odds. You know that they're going to be able to field a competitive team. Nearly every one of these names, like you mentioned, has a pretty healthy amount of not just club experience, but club success, given the strength of the San Francisco scene. And one of the things I think is really cool about this team in particular is that the San Francisco scene can be so splintered. There are multiple teams in every division, and that keeps a lot of the talent from uniting. So you're going to see a lot of players you don't necessarily get to see play together do so in this situation. Someone like a Lexi Zalk and a Sharon Lynn and a Shayla Harris, right? These are all players who might be on different teams at a given time, but now are all going to be fighting in the same colors, which I think will be a lot of fun to watch. And I'm a big Han Chen fan, so excited to see her back on the field. I also have a San Francisco Falcons jersey that I won on social media, so go Falcons.
Okay, well, maybe you're gonna help them out with the fan engagement side, Keith.
Yeah, I'm probably not supposed to have favorites, but I got the gear, so I got to rep the squad. Maybe I could say I met my wife in San Francisco, so there's my emotional connection.
Good omens. So Los Angeles Astra, big team, 23 players on this roster. Dina Elamelek, certainly the star name. Can this team put up some challenge this weekend?
They're certainly the team I think that you'd get the most excited about to compete with San Francisco. In addition to Dina Elamelek, there's a lot of players who were really top-end college players out of California, whether it's Audrey Brown from UC Santa Barbara or Malia Smith from UCLA. I see Stephanie Pritchard, Camille Wilson, who has always been a really exciting player to watch, given her just blazing speed. So this should be an athletic team. They should be pretty exciting on the field. They could be able to play at a really fast pace. Obviously, everyone's going to be keeping their eyes on Dina Elamelek. How can you not? But this is a team I think that probably has the best shot at taking out San Francisco. Maybe you disagree. I mean, maybe there's another team.
Let's look at all the rosters and then we'll discuss. On we go to the San Diego Super Bloom, and some big names here as well. Kayla Helton, Krista Pajunas, Kelly Iwamoto. Small roster again, 17 players. I'm curious about this team. Definitely some names that I don't know, but I think as much as we talk about LA as compelling, I think this team also compelling because it's a city that doesn't necessarily get as much shine as its northern San Francisco counterpart when you're talking about women's division. So how will this compare to the Wildfire in the club division? And we'll see.
Kayla Heldon going to be one of the only players I think who's going to have some semi-pro experience, having played with Revolution, now Revo Pro, in the Premier Ultimate League at points. We also get to see the return of Alex Diaz, another electrifying player. But I think that this team has some real chops, particularly in the backfield. Kelly Uemoto, Lindsay Lang. That's a nice core to build around. Teresa Zettner just had a really big nationals as well. So this is a very competitive team. They've got pretty much the full complement, whether it's a good handler, strong defense, strong cutters. I don't know if the depth will be there, but with only 2 games, maybe that won't be so tested. I'll be curious to see what kind of the pace of play looks like, because we've seen semi-pro leagues try and push more towards a faster pace of play for the sake of spectators, and that could be to the detriment of a team like this that has a short roster.
And finally, the Arizona Sidewinders. They got a pretty sizable roster. There's some names, as you know, from Fort Collins Shame on this team. And then, of course, Lawless out of the Arizona area. And, a lot of solid players coming together. I'm very interested to see this team compete. Helen Eifert, Cynthia Thomas, Cody Lippincott, Jade McLaughlin. I think this is the sneaky team, Keith. I think this is the team that people are not going to be expecting to be that competitive, but actually might be really good.
If we hadn't seen Lawless have the season that they did, there would be a lot fewer familiar names on this roster for me. I'm excited to see Cynthia Thomas as anybody else. Helen Eifert, another great player, like you mentioned, Cody Lippincott. But I will say for this Arizona scene, they seem to really have. They wear the chip on their shoulder very well, I should say. They'll take the chip right off the shoulder and hit you with it. They like playing as the underdog. They like going out there and proving themselves. And I think that that's a really easy narrative to build when you're going to be playing against. We haven't seen the schedule, so I don't know exactly who they're playing against. But if you're playing against a bigger, well-known team like San Francisco or LA or San Diego, that's a really easy internal narrative to say, like, look, nobody expects anything of us. They don't know who we are. They don't know what we can do, and to really get fired up, because that's something that we've seen from that Arizona community. We've seen them do that well, and I expect to see them show out pretty effectively in that front.
So there's the teams. So I think we both agree that San Francisco probably the favorite. Who do you put as number 2, Keith?
I did talk up LA, and I think maybe from a talent standpoint, I might be on LA, but I think I'm going to take Seattle. I said I think that their ability is going to be amplified by the experience that they have together. They also are an extremely veteran roster. This is a team with a ton of experience. Not a lot of youth on the Tempest roster. This is mostly a very well seasoned team. So I'm actually going to take Seattle, I think, as the top challenger, followed by very closely by LA. But after San Francisco, I think it's a pretty competitive group. Unfortunately, I do think Arizona and Utah may be a step behind the rest of their crop.
I think I was expecting you to take LA so that I could take Seattle, but I too am going to take Seattle. I just think, it's not exactly going out on a limb to say that San Francisco and Seattle are going to field high quality women's teams. I honestly kind of think Arizona might be number 3, and that's a little bit of a hot take.
I'd say that's a very hot take. You're going back to your Southwest roots, huh?
We'll see how it shakes out. Of course, a lot is going to depend on scheduling and which teams have to face which other teams, right? If you get San Francisco versus Seattle in a game, almost certainly the loser of that game will not finish in the top 2, most likely, because you got to probably go 2-0 to be up at the top. So we will see how that all shakes out. But I'm a Southwest homer. Maybe I'm a New Mexico homer. There's some Albuquerque players on the team. But I don't know. I just think that there's a little more talent there than people may recognize.
That's what they're hoping to prove. Who do you think is most likely to be the fan favorite here, to get the engagement points?
Gosh, that's a great question.
I'm really not sure.
I think having a bigger roster is probably advantageous for this.
That's fair.
So that's kind of like my baseline assumption, but then likely to get fired up than, compared to a San Francisco or Seattle, for example. I'm going to go with Utah. I feel like Utah is really they love Frisbee and they're all in, and they're tired of being sort of considered like not an elite level state and Frisbee scene.
I think I'm in the same boat. I mean, I think that you're right that the underdog is going to be a powerful motivator, but also, it's because fans don't have a chance to see these players on the big stage very often. If you're a fan of Marissa Mead, you get to watch her play on stream a couple times a year anyway. It's not that hard to come and catch her, but if you want to root for these Wild players, you don't get a lot of chances to do that. So I think that'll be a big motivator, but the Seattle marketing machine is pretty strong and well established. So I think that Seattle is another team that those are the two that stand out to me as being the favorites to get that fan engagement really going and earn themselves some extra points. Plus, they got Gina Tickhome, could get them the longest pull.
That's a good point. It's a good point. All right. Well, you can tune in for all the action this weekend. Games start in the afternoon on Saturday Pacific time. So that's going to be mid-afternoon Eastern. And again, you can follow along with everything on the Western Ultimate League's YouTube channel. And of course, we'll have preview coverage up on ultiworld.com and links to all the live streams. So check it out. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're talking college pools. Yes, the pools are out, and we're going to talk about them. So stay with us. You're listening to Deep Look. Welcome back to Deep Look. While we were away, we got some news. In fact, we got multiple pieces of news, and we're glad to share with you here. Before we talk a little college champs, on the topic of the Western Ultimate League, we now have the official game schedule. So, Keith, run it down for us. What are our 6 games?
So we've got the 6 games lined up, and let's see. I'm trying to figure out the best way to break it down. Just go game by game. So Saturday starts off with Arizona taking on Los Angeles. Then you have San Francisco against Utah, and you close up with San Diego against Seattle. And then on Sunday, they start off with Seattle and Utah, San Francisco against Arizona, and then San Diego closes against LA. So, our favorites, San Francisco, they're going to get shots at Utah and Arizona. Well, it seems like a favorable schedule for them to not have to play against LA or Seattle. Seattle plays San Diego, and they play San Diego and Utah. LA plays San Diego and Arizona. So it doesn't seem like anybody has like a brutal schedule. I mean, I guess Arizona plays LA and San Francisco.
Doesn't Utah
That's kind of tough?
Francisco,
I mean,
Seattle?
Basically Arizona and Utah got tough schedules.
Yeah.
That's kind of rough.
Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing that some of that is like they wanted to mix it up,
Yeah, they probably didn't want to play each other,
right.
I imagine.
I mean, I think the reason you have LA and San Diego playing in the final game on Sunday is because that's like kind of a marquee spot to have people come out and, watch the game. But otherwise, it looks like they're mostly matching up places that, wouldn't typically play against each other. So rather than having Arizona play against San Diego, which like those teams play a lot, you have Arizona playing against San Francisco and Seattle. Or no, that's not the matchups. That was Utah that had those two, right?
Yeah, basically, I think you're right that, and also they're basically totally avoiding California matchups aside from that marquee LA San Diego closer.
Right.
I don't think there's any other California
which I think is fun.
matchups.
I mean, I think that's nice.
Yeah,
some variety for the players and for for fans and everything. So anyway, this only strengthens my San Francisco conviction, Keith.
It certainly makes them look good. I mean, how do you feel like it affects? I know you had some love for Arizona. Now they got to play LA and San Francisco. Does that change your opinion on their fortunes?
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably lose to San Francisco, and I like their chances against LA.
All right, that'll be interesting because that's the first game, so we get an exciting one off the bat.
Kicking it off with a good one. So that's the schedule, and again, you can follow along this weekend on the Western Ultimate League YouTube channel and Twitch. So also the World Games tryout list has come out. By the way, also the World Juniors tryout list is out. That came out yesterday. It's been a busy week. We've had a bunch of news. So shout out to the 200 juniors players who are going to get tryouts. It's crazy because with the time away, I looked at the lists and I'm like, I only know 10% of these players, whereas normally I know like 50%. Maybe not 50, but like,
right.
I've seen a bunch, high school national invite, reporting on the youth season, YCCs. It feels a little different this year. We had the very, truncated YCC, not a lot of top programs there. We've basically missed a season and a half, if not 2 seasons of high school ultimate. No high school national invite for 2 years. So it's kind of a black box, but still some names out there, Keith. Lula Dutile's out on this list. She's making the team.
Please stay healthy. Come on, we can do it. I'm knocking on wood. I don't know if that is audible. It probably made my camera shake, but I'm hoping that we could finally get the Lula Dutile breakout that our podcast has so long asked for.
And the USA Ultimate World Games tryout list is out. 74 players have been invited to try out, including 11 returners from the 14 that made the 2017 team. Keith, you've had a chance to take a nice deep look at this. What do you notice? What stands out to you about this list of obviously tremendously talented players?
Well, you and I talked about the probability of players returning, making the team again. I mean, that is typically what we've seen. And so for the 14 slots, which will probably be cut down to 20 and then become 14, that's what we've seen in past years, there are 11 returners from the 2017 team. So that list, Mickle, Desmond, Boscher, Freechild, Kocher, Finney, Stewart, Nazaroff, Lindsley, Surge, and Hoffman. So chances are there are just not a lot of spots up for grabs. I don't know how many of those players are going to, be a little long in the tooth for another run. How many of these young, exciting players who have come up can get in the position to take one of their spots, or perhaps somebody who hasn't had a chance yet will. But there's a very interesting crop, as you would expect, when you're talking about basically the most talented players in the U.S.
Yeah. So, by the way, the 3 players that were not invited, Bo Kittredge, Sandy Jorgensen, and George Stubbs. Jorgensen played.
I'm thinking they probably didn't apply.
Yeah. Well, Jorgensen, 2 of them weren't eligible because Stubbs and Kittredge didn't play a club, and are basically just not playing Ultimate anymore. Jorgensen played in club, but did not try out for the Worlds teams last time around, and my guess is probably did not apply here either. There's also 4 players that made the initial 20 but didn't make the final cut in 2017. That's Opie Payne, Nikki Spiva, Claire Chastain, and Cammie Groom. I think all of those players really still have a chance to make the 20 again. You also have 13 players who were invited that were not initially selected to the Worlds teams for 2020. Because remember, they make this list basically from that team, and then they add some more players. So they had 13, which is a pretty high number. I think higher than I feel like a normal year has. Those players are Bridget Meisner, Jessie O'Connor, Julia Sherwood, Karen Earhart, Lindsay Sue, Sam Little, Robin Fenig, Ronnie Eater, Nathan Champeau, Daniel Lee, Anders Jungst, and Antoine Davis, and Nick Stewart, who was one of the players who made it in 17. So a lot of good players on that list, right? A lot of players who just had a very nice club season and club nationals, hence the fact that they got an invite. How much does that momentum carry through into this tryout? I guess we'll see.
A lot of young players too. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a chance kind of for the staff to evaluate them and get a look, and then they'll be thinking about what the future is for those players. And I said this in our Discord for those who join us in there, but shout out to Nathan Champeau. I mean, this is a player who I would hazard a guess very few people outside of Michigan knew who he was at the beginning of 2021, and now he's going to the World Games tryouts. So that's an impressive turnaround for him.
I mean, it's often said, and I think it's true, simply getting invited to this tryout is an incredible achievement. It's something that's reserved for a very select number of players. And, most of them are not going to make the team. And they're probably the best player in their league, in their pickup game, in their city in many cases, and they still might not make the team. That's just how it goes. So looking forward to hearing more about the tryouts. I don't think we have a date yet. I'm sure it's set. This team being coached, of course, by Maddie Sang, with the assistant coaches Miranda Roth-Knowles and Patrick Sherlock. So looking forward to talking more about this. Now that we have the tryout list, Keith, we're going to do an upcoming subscriber bonus segment as we pick our official teams before the tryouts.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we probably should go so deep. We pick 2 teams. I don't know. We'll see how, maybe we'll do a draft.
Wow, draft. I like it. All right. So now to the main event. College championships, pools, and seeding are here. So let's break it down. Of course, we're going to get all 4, D1 men's and women's, D3 men's and women's. We're not going to talk D3 today. We got nothing but love for D3, but 7500 Club will have an episode soon previewing nationals, and they'll talk about it all there. So check out our friends of the pod here on Deep Look, 7500 Club, for your D3 insights. And so let's take a look at these D1 pools. Keith, which division do you want to start in?
Let's start in the men's division, because there was one thing that I started to get curious about when I started looking at the overall seeding. And the first thing I thought was this looks pretty similar to the power rankings.
So,
I mean, you start at the top. You start at the top of the men's division. I'll go until we get a mismatch. UNC at 1, Colorado at 2, Washington at 3. We have Carleton at 4. They have Carleton at 6. But then Brown, Pittsburgh in that order, 4, 5. Yep. Then you get. Then we do have a little switch. Then they get a little mixed up. They have Cal Poly Slow at 7. Understandable given their more recent success than Texas and NC State. We have them at 9. But then it's Texas and NC State. It gets a little more mixed the further you go down, but the top really looks a lot like what we have out there.
So here's what I've been told, okay? Because I've been trying to get the details on exactly how this seeding happened, because we were told it was going to be a, quote, geographically constrained random draw. And it's hard to look at this and really think that there's much randomness going on when the top seeds are very, very, very clearly the top teams. And
it would be
for the most
so unlikely for this to be random. Right. It is literally possible for this to be the random result.
Okay, so this is what I was told. All right, this is straight from USA Ultimate. Seeding was based on a geographically constrained random draw. Teams were placed into buckets to account for competitive balance and randomly drawn into seeds. If a randomly drawn bucket yielded multiple teams from the same region into the same pool, the bucket was randomly redrawn until all pools had interregional matchups. And they also used the rule that no team that finishes ahead of another team at regionals was seeded lower than that team. Okay, so here's what you do. You get all the teams and you make 20 buckets, Keith, and then you randomly seed the buckets into the pool. Okay, so this team... No, I don't know. I've asked for clarification on what the buckets were and how many teams and which teams were in which buckets, because at the end of the day, I do think this looks a lot more like a standard seeding than it looks like a random seeding, because I don't know how it's possible for you to get perfect top 3-4 seeds every time if you're doing it randomly. I just don't think it's possible. But to me, honestly, I'm just telling you what I honestly think. I think they just seeded it for the most part and maybe did a little bit of randomness with the bottom seeds, but they're not coming out and saying that. So I don't really care. These pools look fine. They're balanced. They're fair. It's not weird and crazy like we thought it could be, which is fine. It just doesn't really feel like it was a random draw.
Maybe that accounts for some of the differences where we have them. I mean, maybe they were like, okay, so we'll just go until we hit a group of teams we think are roughly similar, and we'll put those in a bucket and then draw them out. And that's how they ended up with Carleton behind Brown and Pittsburgh,
which is fine.
Or Cal Poly SLO ahead of Texas and NC State. Totally fine. I don't think these are unreasonable moves at all. But if you look at it that way as little chunks, then it pretty much lines up with what we have.
All right, so let me just give you a quick rundown of the pools. I'm just going to hit you with the pools, and then we'll talk briefly. Now, of course, our big preview show is coming next week, so you'll have to wait for that. But here are your pools. We'll start with Pool A. It's UNC, Texas, Michigan, Wisconsin, and UC San Diego. Pool B is Colorado, Cal Poly SLO, Georgia, Northeastern, and Utah State. Pool C is Washington, Carleton, Ohio State, UNC Wilmington, and Cornell. And Pool D is Brown, Pitt, NC State, Tulane, and Illinois. So, Keith, Pool of Death, what you got?
I've been thinking about this because it is hard to pick one. I mean, this is one of the most balanced set of nationals pools I feel like I've seen in any tournament that I can recall. And maybe that's a lack of information about the teams. Maybe there's not enough out there for us to have the kind of fine gradient that we might in a usual year. But, I look at the tops of these pools and, they all look pretty strong. Obviously, the layup is to say Pool D. And if you've been here before, you know the song that we like to sing. 4, 5, 9. I mean, the numbers are all really close together. There's just no way around it. And so the 4, 5, 9 pool is always going to be really hard.
NC State's they're tough. I mean, even for a 9 seed in that pool, like they're tough. I would not be shocked if they got an upset win over Brown or Pitt.
I agree with you. But I will say, and this is by design, Tulane to me is the weakest 4 seed. So, you look across the rest of the pools, and I get a little nervous if my 4 seed is Wilmington or Wisconsin or Northeastern. That's a concerning situation to be in. It's tough to really gauge which exactly of these pools is the toughest pool. I think if I had to say on balance, maybe it's Pool C because they get the tough 4 seed, and I think Ohio State is maybe only slightly worse than NC State.
I'm actually pretty curious about B. I mean, I know like Colorado's got a lot of hype. They're probably going to win that pool. But
you've been the Colorado hype train conductor.
So one thing, okay, so Cal Poly, they're going to be good. We know this. They're well coached, athletic. I mean, they've been sort of like the shining star of the West Coast, to be honest, over the last couple of years. Now, the thing that makes this pool interesting to me is that Georgia, I think, looked extremely good at regionals. Now, it's hard to know without getting a sense of the teams overall. Am I seeing Georgia blasting terrible teams, or am I seeing an actually really impressive team that could do damage at nationals? They looked very athletic, very talented, and maybe it is that Tulane was weak, but they blasted them. So I was impressed with what I saw from Georgia at Southeast Regionals, which makes them feel like quite an interesting 3 seed. I also honestly, yeah, you're right, Keith. It feels balanced because then I look over at Pool A, and normally you're like, whatever. And sure, UNC is going to win this pool, but Michigan's good. Texas is good. The top 3 seeds in every pool are good, and they're extra good because they all have their alones. So
except for Georgia and Carleton.
Except for Georgia. Doesn't Carleton have some? I thought they had some.
Do they? Maybe they do. We gotta get the straight list so that we know.
Right.
I know Georgia does not.
Georgia does not. 100%. So yeah, very very interesting. And okay, so let's go to this most exciting matchup for you.
I mean, there's no way around Brown and Pittsburgh being the most exciting matchup. So I'm gonna go to my second most exciting matchup. I actually think it's Texas Michigan.
That's gonna be a good one.
I mean, those are 2 teams that I feel like could really go either way, and I think these are teams that we've said are right on the fringe of being in that, can you really compete for a semi spot?
You got to win that game.
Can you be that good? Can you be an upset team? So, winning that game is vital.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really good one. I'm excited for Cal Poly, Georgia. I'm excited for maybe these bottom-seeded teams. I mean, like Texas, Wisconsin, for whatever reason, like I get excited for that matchup. I don't actually know if that's going to be a competitive game, but those teams often play at warm-up, and it's always fun. You got these big state schools. I just like that matchup for whatever reason. And I'm really curious about OSU's quality and like how they stack up with Cut and with the Sun Dodgers ahead of them. They're not as good as Pitt, but like they're darn good. So how do they compare with those top teams?
Did they lose to Pitt by 1 at regionals? Although their regionals was not much
crazy
to
weather. Crazy weather. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we'll get more into these pools and kind of making our predictions in our preview show next week. But those are the pools. It does feel really balanced. And I guess we'll wait to hear more about the seeding situation. But let me go to the women's division. And they made a similar story here, right? The top seeds are the seeds that you would expect at the top. Carleton, UNC, UC Santa Barbara, Washington are your top 4 seeds. And let me hit you with the pools. Here we go. Pool A, Carleton, UCSD, Vermont, Chicago, FSU. Pool B is UNC, Western Washington, Georgia, Cal Davis, and Ohio. Pool C is UCSB, Pittsburgh, Texas, Michigan, and Boston University. And Pool D is Washington, Colorado, Virginia, Penn, and SUNY Binghamton in the 20 spot. So, Keith, let's go right to the same thing. Do you see a pool of death here in the women's division, or does it feel very balanced like in men's?
I don't. I would say that it's clear to me that there's a hardest pool here, and it's Pool C. I think Pittsburgh is very good. I think they're the real deal, and I think Texas is probably the best 3 seed. So, I would not be shocked if Pittsburgh turns out to be the best 2 seed. I don't know if they necessarily will. I think UCSD is probably the favorite to do that, but Pittsburgh is one of my dark horse teams for this tournament. So to have 2 really strong teams in that spot is a tough draw. But after that, Pool B, because they have an incredibly underseeded UC Davis, in my opinion.
Tough.
Based on what we've seen, I'll talk more about the seeding in general in a moment. But yeah, UC Davis as a 4 seed is that's woof.
I mean, especially when you look at like they're the 14 seed, and like you get to the 16 seed, and we're talking about teams that wouldn't be at nationals in a normal year. Penn, FSU, Ohio, BU, who literally got in because Tufts didn't go, and Binghamton. So there, you've got Cal Davis and Michigan at the 14 and 15, and like those teams are way better than the bottom 5 seeds. And yeah, Davis, I mean, where's Davis in the power rankings right now?
9.
Good. Have fun, Pool B. I actually, you said Pool C is the toughest. I actually think Pool B is the toughest because you have a Western Washington team that's got some really talented alums on there. You've got a scrappy Georgia team that, if it's not Texas, it's Georgia. I think Virginia's overseeded at 9. And then you've got Davis, which is just like this, grenade in the 4 spot. Like, who are the teams that are coming out of that pool? UNC and then probably Western, but like, could Davis finish second in that pool? 100%.
The seeding is if they hewed close to our power rankings, then there were 2 different people doing the D1 men's and D1 women's seeding, because these are nothing like our power rankings. This looks
more random,
closer to random. And I mean, you can kind of track the logic that leads to a difference here. And the big thing to me is that they do not rate the Southwest the same way that we do, because UC San Diego and UC Davis got really tough ends. I mean, we have San Diego at number 5 overall in our power rankings and Davis at number 9 on the strength of the region itself. I mean, they beat good teams, UCLA, Stanford, to get there. And, instead they're the 14 seed and the 8 seed. Usually I would expect USAU to go for kind of like recent history. So I'm surprised to see UC San Diego all the way down at 8.
Colorado at the 5 seed? I don't know about that. I'm
not sure that I see them, like, they're really far away from a Texas team that they barely beat, right? And I don't get Virginia at number 9 at all. I mean, that's got to be a strength of,
again,
of the AC kind of
maybe
thing.
The buckets were bigger in the women's division and the randomness, or maybe it was just pure coincidence that the men's division feels like it hews more closely to kind of like how you would seed it by hand. I don't know, but I agree with you. Like, this seeding feels much less connected to kind of like how you would draw it up.
But Charlie, the biggest injustice here.
Tell me.
How is SUNY Binghamton seated behind Boston University? Explain it to me. Make it make sense for me. This is Metro East slander of the highest order. There's just no justification for it. BU didn't even win their way here. They got crushed.
SUNY Binghamton is a regional champion. And Boston University lost like 15-4 to Tufts.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Come on. I mean, throw Binghamton a bone.
Well, we are throwing Binghamton a bone. They will be streamed in round 1 against Virginia.
Well, we just talked about how overseeded Virginia is, and then I said SUNY Binghamton's underseeded by 1 spot. So we won't get into the minutia, but it's a chance for an upset. If Binghamton beats Virginia, we should have them on the show or something. We can we can get a call in. We can get a call in or something.
I like it.
Soundbite.
What's your game to watch here?
Ooh. Well, in reality, it's probably I'm gonna go away from the 4-5 again because it's not fair. It's probably Pitt, Texas. So I want to see Pitt prove me right. But special shout out to Carleton UCSD. Obviously, the sequel is going to recast a lot of the characters.
Yep.
But when you got a big hit, don't you want to see what the follow-up's going to be?
It doesn't feel quite the same to me without Dina there, but like, yes, it feels like it could be the first time they've played each other since that game.
You're not going to see the sequel because you're like confident it's going to be as good as the original. You're just going because you want to know.
Yeah, sure.
You want to see what happens.
We are filming that game, not streaming that game, for what it's worth. I mean, I'm excited to see how Western Washington stacks up with UNC. It's been breathless amounts of hype for Carleton and UNC, and perhaps that will end up being very justified. But one of the things that I love about these tournaments is that, you still got to go out and beat good teams. And Western Washington has some really good talent, in their alum group that's coming back. And sure, they're not going to have the depth of UNC, and maybe they get rolled. But I think that's an interesting, probably my most interesting 1-2 matchup. I think Washington, Colorado is good, but I think Washington is like pretty clearly like a couple steps better than Colorado. I mean, I guess I could say the same thing about UNC and Western, but I feel like Western has a higher ceiling than Colorado and probably should have been seated higher than them if you were doing it by hand. So yeah, those are probably a couple that I would point to.
I can't just keep talking about how much I think Pittsburgh's good, but I think UCSB is also really good. So that maybe I should have said UCSB Pitt, because
that's a good one.
That's
too.
a real litmus test for both of those teams.
Sure.
UCSB, could they really push UNC or Carleton? Like, how they play against Pitt could tell us a lot about that.
It's true. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll be streaming 2 games per round and filming another 2 games per round. We're going to be streaming let's see. We're gonna film and stream all of the quarterfinals in D1. And we are also going to get 4 of the 8 D3 quarters, and we're streaming all of the D3 semis, and we're streaming the D3 finals. ESPN handles D1 semis and finals as per usual. I believe that the finals will be on ESPNU live. And of course, the full streaming schedule and filming schedule will be out. By the time this podcast comes out, it may already be out. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And, it's just the extra uncertainty. You take a normally uncertain college championships and you sprinkle in a 0 regular season and add in the alumni, and you have a very nice stew cooking up, Keith.
You do. I'm sitting here wondering, and I'm like, what are the odds that Kennedy McCarthy, after pool play, leads all players in total points, total scores? Like, got to be really high. Like, massive favor.
Remember that somebody has to throw Kennedy the rock.
Well, no, I mean, she could throw them too. Like, so all scores total, not goals, not assists, just combined. I mean, I think there's got to be a really good chance.
Tiebreaker, sure. Kennedy McCarthy's total goals and assists in.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. All right, don't let me forget that, y'all. I got to do that as one of the game tiebreakers.
Are they even going to have enough stats keepers? There's so many games.
There's so many teams. And the people that staff, I bet a lot of the people that would staff the club event are like college kids. I don't know if the club players are coming out for this.
I guess we'll find out. But it all starts 8 a.m. on Friday, December 17th, Pacific time. So set your calendars now and get ready for some holiday season college championships. It's going to be a blast. So this
has really got me going. I'm ready. Like, this has got me hyped now that I'm actually looking at the teams, thinking about the matchups, thinking about Kennedy McCarthy scoring a ton. Like, these kinds of things are getting me hyped up.
We're going to have our preview show next week, so make sure to tune in for that. And I want to say thank you so much for listening. If you haven't, tell a friend who you think might enjoy listening to Deep Look. Hit us with a review on your favorite podcasting app. Like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And we will talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.